I still have knowledge of the Poor People's Campaign. I still know that the reason Dr. King was killed was because of the Poor People's Campaign.
Facts.
You know, and that's what it really takes in organizing to develop a leader. You're not only thinking about a campaign, but you're thinking about a movement.
Whatever you heard of me ain't worthy to me. I'm just too cutthroat, verbal surgery. How you claim to know that stuff when your shelf's too high? I keep mines at eye level. What you trying to hide?
Peace, 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 beautiful family. This is Dr. Walter Hidalgo, and this is the Know Thyself podcast. We are back for another one. The Know Thyself podcast utilizes the metaphor of the shelf in order to extrapolate the self. And the way we do that is we invite guests to come in and share something about themselves. And before I introduce my guest, let's do some of the agenda, which is shout out a few of our sponsors, people that we're rocking with. I want to shout out my brother Steve and his 2020 collections. You know, we talk about black owned. Holla at my brother right there. The sweaters, the clothes, the incense, holla at him. If you're looking for another book to add to your shelf, I hardly haven't advertised my own book, but check out my book, Beyond the Four Walls, The Rising Ministry and Spirituality of Hip Hop. Definitely something to put in the catalog. And if you're looking for any coaching, any speaking engagements, not only can you holler at my sister here, but you can definitely holler at us. Just shoot me an email. The website is coming soon. But shoot me an email at knowthyshelftv@gmail.com. All right. The other thing we always do is I like to shout out a group of individuals. And today I want to give a big shout out to all the ministers, all the community organizers, all the people who learn, teach, and practice what they preach, man. You know who I'm talking about. Because today I got someone that I love, I respect, I admire. And when we talk about the gods and the goddesses coming together in the building, you know G.O.D. is in the house. I got with me my sister from another, Onleilove Alston.
Hi, Dr. Walter. How are you? It's good to see you. We used to be in this area taking seminary classes together. Now it's dead up here in Morningside Heights because we're in the pandemic. But
that's right.
Yeah, but thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for your ministry and what you do, and I'm excited to talk today.
Oh man, we got so much because we're living in an historical moment right now, and we'll get into that. But as I always do when I invite guests, if we were to jump into Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, have you ever seen that movie?
I have. I like those
right?
movies.
Remember that?
Yeah.
If we were to jump into a time machine to go back to a younger Onleilove, what would we see? What would we hear? What would we smell? Because you're originally from?
I'm from East New York, Brooklyn.
Yo, shout out to Brooklyn,
yes,
to all my BK
but
people.
Especially East New York.
Yes, East New York.
Shout out to all of Brooklyn, but we got to shout out the East. So, you know, younger Onleilove, definitely born in Brooklyn at Brookdale Hospital, mostly raised in East New York in pink houses. And, you know, I guess you would see, you know, family. I come from a big family. You would definitely hear, you know, hip hop, all the, you know, hip hop from back in the day. And so, yeah, Brooklyn is very much like a part of what shaped me. I've lived in like Harlem, Uptown since 2007. So now it's like each place has a role because I grew up in Brooklyn, but then I kind of feel like I became a woman in Harlem. So I don't think you know, I know Harlem people are very protective, so I still claim Brooklyn, but I have been here since 2007.
That's beautiful. And one thing, speaking of Harlem, one thing that I want to pick your brain about is that the way we connected was through Union Theological Seminary. Speaking of Harlem, because that's still Harlem.
That is we're in Harlem now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I always tell people the Walter before Union and the Walter after, two totally different people.
Yes.
What drew you to Union?
So when I was at Penn State University, where I did my undergrad, we had a lot of issues with racism. You know, Penn State is known for the famous football team. And, you know, I was involved in the Black Caucus. And the president of Black Caucus, she wrote, okay, so back up. So Penn State, you know, is the #1 party school in the country, football school, huge Greek life. The student newspaper, they took a picture at the Greek fair. That was when all the fraternities and sororities, you know, just put up tables, and it was like a recruitment event. They took a picture of 2 black members of Omega Phi Psi. Sorry if I'm saying it wrong, it's been a long time, but the Omegas, 2 Omegas that I know. They took a picture of them at the Greek fair, and instead of putting it with the Greek fair story, they put it over a story about a local robbery. So it made it look like these 2 student leaders committed a robbery as black men. So the newspaper was contacted by Black Caucus. They apologized. They wrote a correction. The president of Black Caucus, she wrote an editorial. Everyone took it as a teaching moment. The newspaper the student paper wasn't upset. You know, it was a teaching moment. And you know, it was a mistake, but now, fast forward, when we look at implicit bias training outside of Harvard, you know, it might have been a mistake on the surface. It might have been a bias for whoever was doing the layout. But everyone took it as a teaching moment and move on. So once she wrote that letter, she started getting hate mail. And then black football players started getting hate mail. And then parents of black football players started getting hate mail. Things such as, you know, you're not winning football games, so why do we need black people at Penn State? All these things. And I went to a Black Caucus meeting on a Sunday night, and she read the first hate mail. So my first homecoming, we spent protesting. People ran onto the 50-yard line and actually prayed. Members of Black Caucus actually prayed and were drug off. Fast forward, we took over the student union building, and because Penn State is a state school, we used the charter of the school and what it was supposed to do for the children of the Commonwealth to hold it accountable for its racist policies. So no college should be racist, but especially a college that's being run off of tax dollars. They went to the Capitol in Harrisburg when the university lobbied for more money and talked about it. So while we were protesting, one last letter was sent, and the letter said, while you all were protesting, we killed another one of you. He's buried on Mount Nittany. But it was Blue and White Weekend, which is kind of like a alumni weekend, and they were doing some type of football event on Mount Nittany, so they did not investigate and look for the body quick enough because they wanted the alumni event to finish. When they finally looked for the body, it was a black man in a tuxedo, and he had a New York ID. So maybe he was traveling for a wedding, for an event. So eventually, you know, we had a platform and a campaign to deal with this racism and got a lot of wins. So that was my first time experiencing organizing. But every hour on the hour, when we took over the student union building, we stopped to pray. And it wasn't just black students, it was white students, Indian students. Even Campus Crusade for Christ had 24 hours of prayer going on. Sadly, and this might shock a lot of people, but Campus Crusade for Christ was one of the Christian organizations at Penn State that stood with us, and a lot of others did not.
It's so interesting because while I'm hearing you say all this, you were pre-Colin Kaepernick. Like, that's That's
and
it's
some of the
been happening.
And the thing is, some of the football players wanted to protest and were discouraged from protesting. And then you can almost see a correlation at Penn State between when the football team was winning, there were less racial events. But when the football team wasn't winning, racist incidents increased. Like clearly saying, like, black people, you are only here because of the football team. And so fast forward to that, I had a real challenge in my faith. I wasn't raised in any particular church. My father was in the 5%ers, but didn't raise me in that. My mother was like the first black atheist I knew, but I did have unfortunately, when I was a child, my family became homeless, and in our year of homelessness, I went into foster care, and then my grandmother took me into kinship foster care. For whatever reason, because no one told me to do this, at 10 I started reading the Bible morning, noon, and night. At 14 I walked to a Black Baptist church, Greater Bright Light Missionary Baptist Church under Reverend H. DeVore Chapman, and I accepted Yeshua, Jesus, as my Redeemer. And so because I wasn't programmed in religion, when I read the scriptures, I thought, you do what it says. So if it says the gospel is good news to the poor, it's supposed to be good news to the poor. If you're supposed to care about the hungry, those in jail, I assumed that's what it was. But when I got to Penn State, what I noticed is, other than a few groups, like many of the Black Caucus leaders were people of faith. One of my brothers in Black Caucus, Brian Favors, his wife is Laree Favors. She does a lot in the media now. Dynamite young black lawyer sister. They taught me about the blackness of the Bible. That was a bright spot. But what I saw was a lot of complacency. I started to encounter the religious right movement because I'm older than what I look. And I was like, wait a minute. I didn't sign up for all of this other stuff. I signed up to be a follower of Yeshua. And I almost left the Christian faith, actually, my first year in college, because I was like, this right here, just being okay with injustice, just excusing racism, I can't do this. And I felt the Holy Spirit tell me, you're not seeing the actual faith, you're seeing a perversion of it. Just stick with it. And then a few weeks later, my African Religious Studies, we had a class called African American Religious Studies, and everyone took it. It didn't matter. It was just one of those, to be honest, I mean, God used it in my life, but it was like one of those popping classes you take with your friends. Like, you could be a black atheist, and you're going to take the class because maybe the person you got a crush on going to be in the class. So I just took it because it's like, oh, this is the popping class. And my professor had us read the book God of the Oppressed by Dr. James Cone. And for the first time, someone broke down how my own experience was in the pages of the Bible. And he told me, he said, you should go to Union and study with Dr. Cone, because I knew I wanted to do something around urban ministry, nonprofit work. I knew I had inklings of what I wanted to do, and it eventually became faith-based community organizing, and I am, a minister. But I didn't know about faith organizing. Like, I did things on campus and in the community rooted in my faith. I just thought, I didn't know how much of a career there could be in it. But when I did my year of service in Public Allies, New York, the ED said, only because, throughout that, it's a leadership development program. Michelle Obama was the ED, or former First Lady Michelle Obama. Let me put some respect on her. You're working at a nonprofit, but they're developing you. And so, the middle of the program, they're like, Onleilove, we know that you want to go to social work school. We know that you're like very faith-based. Why don't you do the dual degree at Union Theological Seminary and Columbia School of Social Work? And so I applied, I got in, and I knew I wanted to study with Dr. Cone, and I also, wanted to get an MSW. So I did the program, and then I got to spend a couple of years really delving into what Isaiah 61 means, liberation theology, black liberation theology, what I call the ghetto gospel of liberation, like literally looking at the conditions of the Hebrew people and the scriptures and comparing it to, to our people today, and actually finding out through history and biblical studies that the ancient Hebrews were black people, and that many black people today are of the lost tribes of Israel. But when I graduated, the first group to organize me was the Kairos Center at Union Theological Seminary.
Shout out to the Kairos.
Which was the poverty initiative back in our day.
That's right, yeah.
And people think them reviving the Poor People's Campaign is new, but it's actually very... No, I got to, and now I'm dating myself, I got to Union in like 2006, and they had already been working on reviving the Poor People's Campaign maybe 5-10 years before that.
Correct.
So what everyone sees now with Reverend Liz Theo Harris and with Reverend Barber, they were working towards reviving Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign decades ago. Having strategy meetings, training poverty scholars. I was one of their poverty scholars, taking us to Marks, Mississippi.
I remember.
Where the campaign started.
I went to one of
Super
Facts. Yes.
Having us transcribe interviews with the Queen of the Mule Train.
Facts, yes.
So today you may see the Poor People's Campaign and be like, wow, they're on Time Magazine. Wow, they're there. But what people don't understand is it was decades of organizing. Before the relaunch of the campaign. And that's one thing that Willie Baptist,
shout out to Willie.
He has been organizing for 50 years.
Yes.
Scholar in residence at Union. He told us study history, but also like you have to be willing to be in something for a long haul. Now, what if in 2006 they would have been like, well, the Poor People's Campaign is not revived. We're done. Everyone sees today, but they don't see all the meetings, all the conferences, the immersions, going to West Virginia, going to Marks, Mississippi, bringing together poor mothers from the inner city and poor white mothers from West Virginia, training leaders to go into congregations. Like a lot of the churches they do work in were seminarians that they train, like me, like you. No one has to convince me about the Poor People's Campaign. I was being formulated as a leader.
Sucks.
Even if I'm not working on the campaign, I still have knowledge of the Poor People's Campaign. I still know that the reason Dr. King was killed was because of the Poor People's Campaign.
Sucks.
And that's what it really takes in organizing to develop a leader. You're not only thinking about a campaign, but you're thinking about a movement. And within a movement, you will win different campaigns. I could say different campaigns that, I've won. We just, like Halt Solitary just passed, or Hurricane Sandy rebuild, or IBNYC, or, this campaign, that campaign. The campaigns for me are just the battles, but the war of dealing with racism, white supremacy, that hasn't been won. So it's like, who am I? Willie Baptist would always tell me, a leader's developing other leaders.
Facts, speak on it.
So it's like, are you willing to invest in someone for 10 years and then let them go and do what they're doing? Take the values you taught them into another round, because that's how you build a movement. So after Union, I had a faith. I always had a strong faith, but after Union, I knew why I believed what I believed. I always knew intrinsically that the Most High was on the side of the poor, but now I could prove it.
Exactly.
I always knew that Yeshua, that Jesus wasn't the white blonde guy that looks like Fabio, but after seminary, I could prove it. And so actually, after seminary, I really interrogated my own faith. And so, I was about to be ordained in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, still loved the church I was in, but I actually wanted to start keeping the Sabbath. Saturday, Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, Shabbat. And the day of rest and worship. And I began to find out that there are tribes in Africa that pre-colonialism, pre-Christianity, kept Saturday as a day of worship and rest. Okay.
slow down, son, or woman, you're killing them, because you're saying, let's slow down, because you're going in and you're saying some stuff that let me unpackage this real quick. All right. It's interesting that you reference Dr. Cohen and Willie and so many giants that for me personally have shaped me as well, right? But I wanna ask you just straightforward. What are the tools that are necessary to be an effective community organizer?
Yeah, so some of the tools, and I've done faith community organizing, which is just organizing faith leaders and faith communities to get off of the pew, off of the prayer mat, into public life, outside of the four walls of the church, the synagogue, the mosque. And right now I'm the Racial Justice Organizing Fellow for the Interfaith Center of New York, which is one of New York's largest interfaith justice groups. And so what I'm doing with the Interfaith Center is we're organizing New York faith leaders around a racial justice platform, because right now in New York, we just got out of a crazy national election, but there is actually in New York a very important local election that will shape the next decade of the city. We have a mayoral seat open, borough president seats open, Manhattan DA, district attorney. Today the verdict came down concerning the murder of George Floyd. And we are, right before we went live, we found out that, the cop who put a knee on his neck was found guilty of all counts. And we thank the Most High for that. But there's still a lot that has to be done in our criminal justice system. Right,
and we were just speaking off camera regards to that, because today, although it'll come out much later, but it'll still create ripple effects. Today's April 20th, 420. Other people are celebrating something else. We won't get into that, but 420 will be a historical landmark because, as you said, George Floyd killer has been, the verdict came in as guilty. And I think it speaks to a lot of the work that you're doing as a faith community organizer, right?
And there are many faith leaders that were in the streets as well, but there needs to be more. There needs to be more. And so as a faith community organizer, there's different types of organizing. There's labor organizing, people who organize labor unions. There's even labor unions for those in film and television. My friend works for one of those unions. There may be, people who organize workers who are not in unions. There may be people who, like Marcus Garvey, was a Pan-Africanist, and he, in the UNIA, he has, today, there are people who organize just people of African descent.
Facts.
Whether it's America, Jamaica, Ghana. There's people who organize within their faith community. There's like Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. They work with everyone, but they organize Jews of all races around economic justice. So there's all types of organizers. But some of the tools you need to be a faith organizer are similar to the tools you need to be a labor organizer. For me, I do believe, and I learned this from Willie Baptist, that those most impacted by the issues have to be at the forefront of solving them.
Can you say that one more time, please?
So those most impacted by the issues have to be at the forefront of solving them. Now, with, some people may think that you can't be from the community you organize. I actually don't think. I think you should be, as much as possible, we need to be trying to find people from the communities that they're organizing. Because when I worked on affordable housing action in East New York, I had a different level of, if I sell out to big real estate, when I visit my grandmother in East New York, I cannot hold my head high. It's a little bit different when you're organizing where you're from and you got to look people in the eye. Now, granted, I have to look myself in the eye, and Yahweh's always watching me. But a lot of times, we don't only want people parachuting in from other communities. So are you willing to listen to those most impacted by the issues? If you're an impacted person yourself, are you willing to step into leadership? also the one-on-one conversation.
Yes.
Just talking to people
Yes.
and listening about what impacts them. But what I learned with working with immigrant communities, African communities, sometimes you can do the one-on-one like we're doing now, but some people, they may want to have a circle. They want to
Facts, yes.
and that's
Yes.
okay as well. The
Yes.
important part is, are you creating spaces where you can listen to what the community wants?
I want to talk about, because we mentioned Derek Chauvin, who just got the guilty verdict. We're talking about community organizing. We're talking about racial justice. And all of this and more has led you to write this book called Prophetic Whirlwind, Uncovering the Black Biblical Destiny. Wow. Because for me, titles are like, I'm already slicing and dicing this, right? And for me, I tell people that my mom introduced me to God, but Dr. Cone reintroduced me to God.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always very difficult for me when I felt no connection to Fabio in these glass ceiling windows in the churches, right?
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that where I grew up, it was brown and black mostly,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I felt no connection, and it wasn't until I did my own history and due diligence, even to the point where I went to Israel, right, on a spiritual journey, to see, smell, and experience it for myself.
Yep.
Beyond the scope of theology, exegeting, reading, history, etc., etc. You don't need to explain it to me, because you'll be singing to the choir, if you will. But I think it's important that we understand and have this conversation, right? The description is there in the Bible. We see references of nation states like Egypt mentioned, Ethiopia in the Bible. African names, African places. The first thing that my tour guide said in Israel was that Israel is the bridge between Asia and Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Afro-Asiatic.
Afro-Asiatic, where we get the term from, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to blab on, because I can go in on this, and it's not about me. It never is about me. Can you give us like a small sort of taste of what this book is about? What is the core message that you're trying to get at?
So I have a ministry, Prophetic Whirlwind Ministries, which was founded in 2014 because I saw a lot of black young people, because now it's normal for us to see police killing black people on camera. But remember, like in 2011, 2012, 2010, we were seeing it for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a lot of young black people basically struggling with, is the Bible the white man's book? Does God care about us? Do Black Lives matter to God? And so I started posting what I learned, and what I knew on social media. And then two mothers from the Union of Black Episcopalians, Roz Hall and Roberta Todd, invited me to do 2 weeks of workshops at Trinity Wall Street, the oldest church in New York City, on the black presence in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, and the black presence in the New Testament in early church history. And Prophetic Whirlwind was born February 2014 based on the Marcus Garvey speech, Look for Me in the Whirlwind. I was born on Marcus Garvey Day. And in that speech, people don't know, Marcus Garvey was a very strong black Catholic. He went to a black Catholic church in Harlem. But also, the people who wrote the Constitution and the hymn for the UNIA were black rabbis from Harlem. And people don't know that. There was a huge Commandment Keepers synagogue in Harlem, and many of the black rabbis helped do the groundwork for the UNIA. And I should also add, Marcus Garvey had two wives named Amy, but not at the same time, and they also played a role. And so Marcus Garvey was very much rooted in the faith. He said he would not allow white racists to make him give up Jesus Christ. And you can go to Harlem and visit the church he was a part of. The UNIA, from its inception until today, has a chaplain.
Facts. Yes.
So it wasn't, he didn't want it to be one particular faith. He wanted us to unite across country and across faiths. but he was very much motivated by his faith. And so that was one of the first examples of a black interfaith organization.
Facts.
You know,
Yes.
black Christians,
Yes.
black of all types,
Yes.
from Catholic to Pentecostal, black Jews, you know, black Orthodox, then later on Rastafarians. So when I listened to the speech, Look for Me in the Whirlwind, which was written while Marcus Garvey was incarcerated in Georgia. So before Dr. King's letters from a Birmingham jail, Marcus Garvey writes Look for Me in the Whirlwind, and he was framed by the U.S. government. I mean, now all this stuff comes out, and the fear of the Black Messiah was first targeting, so COINTELPRO was first developed to target Garvey, then it grew to King and
Correct.
Malcolm X.
Yeah.
And
That's
why
right.
a fear of a Black Messiah? You know, these are some things we just hear stuff
Exactly.
and we think it's normal, but when you're celebrating Good Friday and remembering the execution, the crucifixion of Yeshua, of Jesus, you are remembering a story when they were afraid of a Black Messiah.
That's a fact.
And that fear still lives until today. The fear of Herod, who tried to kill all the little Hebrew boys. The fear of Pharaoh, who tried to kill all the little Hebrew boys. Because some of our black people are complicit in white supremacy. So the whole Exodus narrative with the Hebrews and the Egyptians, yeah, those were two different types of black colored people, but yet injustice was happening.
Correct.
So that even challenges us to think about what are we doing among ourselves as people of color. But Prophetic Whirlwind, Uncovering the Black Biblical Destiny is a book that I spent about 6 years researching Jews in Africa and Jews in America. And I chronicle and cover 15 African tribes and ethno-linguistic groups that have Hebrew origins, their traditions, their oral histories, their migration stories. And then I transition to African American culture and cover some of the hidden aspects of African American culture, whether it be the fact that Marvin Gaye grew up in a Hebrew Pentecostal denomination,
Yes,
keeping
right.
the Sabbath, keeping the feast.
Yes.
Whether it be that Marian Anderson, who sang Lift Every Voice and Sing, had an African American Jewish grandfather. Jackie Wilson was an African American Jewish person. We cover, but there have been many books written about Jewish tribes in Africa, Hebrew tribes in Africa. But my book also goes into what does this mean for salvation, and what does this mean for the Black freedom struggle and looking forward. So that's why it's Prophetic Whirlwind, because we're looking forward. And when you think about the whirlwind in Scripture, it's either judgment or the Holy Spirit gathering Yahweh's people from all the four corners of the earth and reuniting them. And so in the book, in my research journey, I actually was invited to spend time with Igbo Jews of Nigeria, the third largest ethnic group in Nigeria. They were the victims of the Nigerian Civil War. And then I was also invited to spend time with the Ashanti tribe who migrated from Israel.
Yeah.
I was also invited to visit the Cephei Jews of Ghana. Also invited by African Hebrew Israelites of Israel to visit black communities in Israel. So was able to go to Jericho, the city where the walls fall down, and realize there's multiple black families in Jericho. And actually, when you go to Israel, especially if you're given an actual tour of Israel and Palestine, you will see that there's way more diversity in Israel than what you are told. There was even an Israeli chapter of the Black Panthers.
Yes, that's right. And I was thinking of, again, because I interviewed Dr. Joshua Bartolomo, who went to Union also. And when I asked him, what's his message, because, Dr. Cohn always said you must find your voice. And he said Jesus was a Black Panther. And I had to pause on that.
This year is the 50th anniversary of the Israeli chapter of the Black Panther, their Haggadah, and that is, I'm pronouncing it wrong probably, but basically there's a prayer book that leads you through the Passover meal. The 50 years ago, the Israeli chapter of the Black Panthers wrote their like prayer book for Passover, and that was mostly done by Mizrahi Jews, which were the Jews that remained in the Middle East. So Paula Abdul is a Mizrahi Jew.
I did not know that.
So growing up, we all was like, "You're African American," and she's like, "No, I'm not." But like, it's like a different type of black, basically. But you can kind of see from her how an ancient Jew would look. It looks like a sister, dance like a sister, sounds like a sister. But, you know, she's not African American. You know what I mean? Like, there are blacks that are indigenous to Israel, Afro-Bedouins, Afro-Palestinians. So if you're like, are you African American? Like, African American didn't exist in antiquity. Black people existed, but these terms, black, African American, white, Asian, these are all like 500-year-old terms. That don't, but, and, you know, but in my journeys, I actually was one of the few African Americans to go on the ground and visit synagogues in Ghana and synagogues in Nigeria, and I take that very seriously. And you know, I had Igbo elders and Cephei elders tell me to tell their story, and I take that very seriously. So now I try to do, you know, work uplifting the stories of blacks in Israel, and I have some community organizing that's going to be going on with young black leaders in Israel, or lifting up the stories of black Jews. You know, I work for the Interfaith Center of New York, and a lot of times when we're doing our interfaith justice work, we might bring together a white rabbi, an Arab, you know, imam, an Asian Buddhist, and say, yay, we're diverse, but did you think to call the black rabbi? Did you think to call, you know, the Latino Buddhist? Did you think to call the African Muslim? These are things. And then even among people of color, Gilbert, a fellow Union alumni, Gilbert Kobina, who's from Cape Coast, Ghana, founded the God Box. So, you know, where we're doing,
this is true.
where we're doing this interview from is called the God Box. It was really the Interchurch Center, but he founded the God Box, and it's based in Ghana, and it's based in New York, and it's a Pan-African interfaith dialogue organization where he brings together people of African descent from anywhere and from various faith organizations to have a dialogue. So what does it look like for a black Hebrew rabbi and a black, you know, pastor to have a dialogue about who is the Messiah? What is a Messiah? You know, it's important that within people of color, we're talking about our differences, because when we're fighting against racism, different powers play us with those differences because sometimes we're not aware of them.
That's right.
And so that black Christian pastor and that black rabbi knows, look, they have differences when it comes to the day of the week to worship and many other things. If they're aware of that and they've talked through that and they've worked through that, then when they're organizing against police brutality in their community, no one else can come in and play them against each other.
Exactly. Because we all know that's part of the strategy is divide and conquer. I think you said so much stuff. And we've reached a point where we ask, I mean, all this stuff is great, but what's coming out of your shelf, Oni? What you got to share for us that's coming out of your shelf today?
So what does out of my shelf mean? Like what I'm reading?
What you bring for us to share from your shelf?
Well, I think, you know, even though this will be maybe broadcast at a later date, it is, you know, it is a day of a lot of emotions, especially for African Americans, for brown folks, with the conviction of the man who killed George Floyd. And I would just encourage our people to take care of themselves. And yes, we can celebrate, but this is just one battle in a long war to deal with racism, white supremacy. And I think another thing that I would share is that Sabbath, taking time to rest, has really helped me as an organizer. And also traveling has helped me a great deal. As a woman of faith, understanding different people, understanding different perspectives, understanding different aspects of blackness. And so I know we're kind of still partially in quarantine, but I would encourage people to really seek out a different experience where you're just learning, you know, whether it's physically traveling or reading a book from someone else's tradition. But also I would encourage our people to rest, because we have a long battle ahead.
Yeah. So what did you bring to share with us today, Oni?
And then speaking of traveling and my book.
There you go.
So I have a couple of prayer shawls. The first one I got was in Jerusalem, but I lost it, unfortunately. This is my second prayer shawl. Beautiful. And it is from the Cephei Jews of Ghana. And the Cephei Jews of Ghana are...
I was going to say, it looks very Ghanaian.
Yeah,
by the
so
colors
this is
and the
authentic kente cloth. So we see a lot of kente print. But this is the kente cloth that's weaved. But this is called a talit. This is a prayer shawl in the Hebrew faith, in the Jewish faith. It has the fringes at the end. And then after the... Hebrew people were free from slavery, everyone was or some people say just men, but there was a commandment to wear fringes on the borders of your garments. But in the ancient Near East, many cultures wore fringes.
Facts.
What made this law so unique for the Hebrew people is that in the ancient Near East, only elites got to wear fringes. But in Yahweh's new kingdom of free and, newly freed slaves, everyone, rich and poor, got to wear fringes. So in the kingdom of Yahweh, everyone is an equal and an elite.
Speak
and
on
then
that, yes.
Among the African Jews, especially in Ghana, people say that the kente print is actually what Joseph's coat of many colors was. And the Cephei Jews of Ghana, they got to Ghana about 500 years ago. They came from Israel, and the migration from Israel to somewhere like Ghana happened over generations. And they had to run away from Roman domination, sometimes Arab conquest. They spent some time in Ivory Coast, finally settled in Ghana, because originally Ghana was a very pluralistic society.
Facts, yes.
Meaning there were Jews, there were people who were other faith traditions, and everyone was left alone. Unfortunately, because of colonialism, that is not the case, and sometimes Cephei Jews are persecuted by their own people. But the Cephei Jews of Ghana are the subject of a documentary called Doing Jewish, a story from Ghana, and there's a rabbi who's like our age, my friend Rabbi Alex, and it traces his story and the community. And a lot of the millennials in the film are people that I now count as friends. And I got this on my first trip to visit the Cephei Jews to interview them for my book. And I brought a delegation of African Americans and Caribbeans. And we were one of the first black delegations to visit them. Many European Jews visit them, but many black people just didn't even know they existed, even black Jews in America. So we visited them. Their leader, Mr. Kofi, prayed for us before we went to the slave castles. So from the Cephei Jews, we head to Cape Coast to visit the slave castle. We fellowshipped, we talked, and this is like very precious to me, this prayer shawl. When we blocked traffic at the ICE building in downtown Manhattan, and we prayed at the intersection of traffic and got arrested, I wore this prayer shawl. When a lot of times when I minister, I wear this prayer shawl, or when I'm praying at home, and it just reminds me of this journey that I've been honored to go on, and it reminds me of the resilience of my culture, and just all that we've been through as a people, but that we are still here. We are reconnecting across borders, and our destiny is still unfolding. And Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, but in the end they were able to reconcile, and Joseph was able to help his family. So many Ghanaians say that prophetically African Americans and Caribbeans and Afro Latinos like we are Joseph.
Yeah.
And they have great expectations for what we're going to be able to do for the continent. So this is my object. And if anyone wants their own prayer shawl like this, Kalanu, which is a great organization that reconnects disconnected Jewish communities under Harriet Bogard, who used to be an organizer. Her daughter, Rabbi Margie, is an organizer. We used to work together in Pico. The Kalanu has a shop where you click on shop, you go to Cephei, and you can get the prayer shawls like this in different colors, and also challah covers. So challah is the bread you have on Sabbath. All made, and the majority of the proceeds go to the Cephei Jews so they can continue to build their community and educate their people. And so Kalanu is a great organization because they are very careful in how they engage Jewish communities in Africa, India, Latin America. And so definitely support them.
That's what's up. And speaking of that, where can people find you, Oni, with your information and get your book?
Yeah, so you can get the book Prophetic Whirlwind Uncovering the Black Biblical Destiny on Amazon, print and Kindle. You can find me and connect with courses, our weekly women's prayer meeting. We also work with brothers who have a meeting. Plug into all the videos and everything on propheticwhirlwind.com. We're also on Instagram, Prophetic Whirlwind. We're on Twitter, Prophetic Whirl, and we're on YouTube, Prophetic Whirlwind, where I have a playlist of some videos from my travels to visit Hebrews in Africa. Also, if you want to connect with me on the organizing end, you can visit the interfaithcenter.org, and you can connect with us with a lot of programming that we have. I do the racial justice programming, but we also have training programs for teachers, for social workers, on how to do your job with knowledge of different faiths. We have the Interfaith Center podcast. So before I was an employee, I was featured on the podcast. We have a lot of programming so people can be educated on different faith communities. No one's asking you to change what you believe, but you should at least be able to be civil to people who are different than you.
That's right.
I used to have a pastor, Reverend Alvin Jackson. He said, there is divinity in difference. And in our country, we're kind of losing that because we're becoming so polarized.
Yes.
And you're not going to be able to work for justice if you don't even see someone as human because they believe different from you. So you can also connect with me at the interfaithcenter.org or propheticwhirlwind.com, and I would love to connect with everyone.
Beautiful. And, to add to that, I always liked what Dr. West said, that there's no monopoly on the truth, man. We are all seeking it, and you're a part of that. And Oni, as we wrap this up, I just want to say, Nori, shout out to Nori and the Drink Champs. He says this all the time. We got to give flowers to people while they're still alive, man. And I want to give flowers, daisies, dandelions, all that to you, Queen, because I'm just so proud of you.
Thank you
just
so
the
much.
Human you've become, and I see God's light shining all over you. As we always do in the Know Thy Show podcast, is that we end with a quote. You are very welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Of course, of course.
Thank you so much, and I honor you.
We might have to have a part 2 with this because we got so much to talk about. So we'll be back. So as we always do, we end with a quote, and this quote comes from John C. Maxwell, and it reads as such: "A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way." Peace, family.
Peace.
Looking